Greetings, innovators and leaders. This is AI for the C-Suite, your compass for navigating the exponential age. I'm Chad Harvey, and we're here to bring you cutting-edge insights on AI tailored specifically for middle-market organizations. Buckle up as we embark on a journey through the transformative world of artificial intelligence. Today, I am delighted to welcome Drew Falkman, a product strategist who spent his entire career building products from 0 to 1. Drew has led product strategy for some of the biggest names in business, HP, Adobe, AARP, Geico, and Audi, among others, giving him a unique vantage point on how enterprises approach innovation and technology adoption. Drew's specialty is coaching emerging founders on how to leverage AI in their product development journey. Many of you may already know him from LinkedIn Learning, where he's been teaching courses on leadership, AI, data analytics, and product strategy since 2008. What makes Drew particularly relevant to our conversation today is his current focus on what's being called vibe coding, a groundbreaking approach to building applications using AI-powered tools. This isn't just about writing code faster, though. It's about fundamentally changing who can build software and how quickly ideas can be validated and brought to market. For execs trying to understand how AI is reshaping product dev, team structures, and competitive dynamics, Drew brings both the strategic perspective and the hands-on experience to cut through the hype and identify what's actually working. Drew, welcome to AI for the C-Suite.
Hey, Chad. Thanks for having me. Look forward to chatting.
Same. This is going to be a lot of fun. And since I have teed up the specter of vibe coding here in the intro, let's get right into that. I know that when you and I previously spoke, we wanted to explore this topic with the audience today because I think a lot of folks hear about it and there's, I think, a lot of fuzziness around what it actually means. So let's start with some basics. What is vibe coding? And more importantly, if I'm, a COO or CFO of a mid-market company, why do I even care about what vibe coding is?
Yeah. So if you're not familiar, I'm not sure where you've been. That's surprising, but it's possible. But you may not have heard the phrase. But vibe coding is really using generative AI and using LLMs to generate code. So instead of generating content or graphics or video, it's actually building websites, applications, and things like that for you. So anyone, really, no matter your technical background, can start building applications in a way that's never been possible before. I mean, they've tried this with all kinds of different tools, but it just didn't work the same. And now it's absolutely incredible what you can do. But as you can imagine, there's a lot of polarity around the subject. People have mixed feelings, I should say, about how and where and how good it is to use vibe coding, especially in the enterprise.
When you say mixed feelings, what are some of the things that lead to those mixed feelings?
So there's a few things. So it's interesting because, I'm super excited about this technology. As someone who I ended up becoming a technical co-founder back in the day when I first got started because I wanted to build things. And the only way to do that was to learn how to code. And so, I learned scripting languages. Eventually, I learned object-oriented programming and all that stuff. But it took me years and so much time to do. And now you can, type something out and generate code. But like a lot of these AI technologies, when you do that, what comes out isn't necessarily what you intended, right? Not only in how it looks and how it behaves, but also how the code is. And I think the danger is in what people are nervous about, and it's specifically mostly engineers that are sort of waving the flag, is they look at some of this code and they're like, we should not be deploying this. It's going to open security leaks. It's going to cause all kinds of problems in this. And it's going to take more energy to go through and find problems and clean it up than it would have if you had just followed the old cycle of Agile and shipping things and, using CI/CD and all that sort of classic software development lifecycle.
Mm-hmm. So let me ask you this. If we're creating something that's not quite ready for prime time, as the original SNL players used to categorize themselves, But it's good enough for prototyping and things like that. How difficult is it then to take something that we've vibe coded and then translate that into a secure product that meets, whatever cybersecurity maturity models or NIST standards or whatever it is that my industry needs in order for us to feel comfortable with that? How's that look?
Yeah. So I think there's like a million different answers to that, and the answer to that question changes literally every day. I mean, these tools, every time a new LLM update comes out, there's often improvements to how this code gets generated, and so the code's getting better and better. Um, there's new sort of agentic workflows and products that are being added, and the whole idea of agentic coding, where you basically just have agents that go through your code and programmatically look for potential issues, and either automatically fix them or flag them to be fixed. And so those kind of tools, I think eventually we're going to get to a point where these will be very production ready. And I think there are some tools that are becoming more production ready. And I think there's a whole wide array of these vibe coding tools. And on one end you have these tools where you can sort of get in and you can write code quickly and deploy it, but the code quality is, we're not sure. And on the other end, you have these, they're almost more like adjuncts to developers like Cursor, where you can essentially just speed up. So if you already can program, you can really speed that up and just say, hey, I want to implement this library. Can you like set that up for me? And it'll import the library and the latest, and it'll create the component. And then you can go in and like sort of do that and clean up. So there's like a whole range of them. I think for like non-technical founders and product designers and product managers, I think the best use at this point is building out working prototypes. So instead of using a tool like Figma, although Figma now has their Figma Make, where it's basically a vibe coding tool, but instead of using these design tools where you're just generating design that at some point needs to be implemented into code, you're actually building fully functional sites in React that you can test with users that actually will respond based on user input, and test them out and validate ideas in a fraction of the time that it would take to have devs do that, and getting a better result than just having sort of a clickable prototype that has pre-canned answers, and you click things and walk them through. So for me, like, prototype creation and validation is the number one use case currently. And then, going to production and stuff, we'll see. It's coming soon, I would say.
And I think that's the really interesting part about this conversation is when we think about what's possible today that wasn't even possible 6 months ago. Let's just stick with the vibe coding, because we could apply that line of reasoning to everything in LLM and AI land. But when we talk about what's possible today and we project forward a little bit, if you were going to put your futurist hat on, where do you see the line shifting and moving over the next 12 to 18 months? And is there any type of, maybe not the Gartner hype cycle, but in terms of like a maturity curve, where are we right now and where are we going over the next 12 months if you wanted to get out over your skis here?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think my biggest question right now is, where are we at LLM technology? And I think there's a lot of people are talking about that. Are we like pushing the envelope on that? Are we going to need new kinds of models to really sort of break to the next level? Or are we sort of, is it going to continue to get better gains and things as we move forward in the next year? Let's assume that we're going to continue with LLMs and we don't need to have a breakthrough. Assuming that to be true, I think that within the next year, I think we'll be at a point where we can comfortably build simple apps, right? There will be guardrails on them, but I think there's going to be emerging tools that will check the code, like in the way that sort of linting tools check code things now, where devs can write standards and you can run this against your vibe coded code and it can either identify or fix depending on the nature of the issue, and get things to a point where they're at least at a baseline of security. I know there are applications out there that people are using that are MVPs and things like that that are vibe coded. There have been some high profile ones that have been hacked, and this is kind of the risk. But let's be honest. I mean, when I first started coding and some of the early products I made, those had some serious security holes in them. Like looking back, and as I learned and looked back, I was like, "Oh, yeah, I guess I didn't realize that was, um, that I had created that thing." So, you know, early coders, young coders that are starting these things, is vibe coding any worse than that? And no, I don't think so, actually. In fact, in some ways, I think it's probably the sort of baseline vibe coded tool is probably as good as some of those first apps that I was building and deploying in production, and also editing in production, but we won't mention that.
Yes, never
um,
mess with the live production environment. Yes.
yes, yes. So, I do think in the next 12 years, though, we'll be at a point, and I think enterprises will start more and more testing out, adding new features, maybe building, validating new product ideas by actually vibe coding them, running some tests on them. So I think and I also think there's going to be a new sort of role of people who their focus is being able to go through this code, identify things, and clean it up. And I think there will be, because if you can have one dev that can do that, and essentially fix at least the main issues, and then you can vibe code, that's still faster than having a team, of 4 or 5 devs that are putting out the code. You're still able to get the code out relatively quickly, and do all that. So I think between those two things, we'll see more and more production apps in this vein.
I really like the way that you started to categorize and package all this, because phase one with the prototyping is going to be involved with the vibe coding. Phase two, if we decide that we want to take this and we've got proof of concept and the prototype works, is we're going to apply a combination of maybe some AI tools that we've got to clean up and identify the patches, and then we're going to have kind of a master architect or a code editor come in on the back end and then really tighten that stuff down. And that really aligns with a lot of what I've been seeing out there, which is as we automate more and more of the code development, I think the skill for the coders of the future, if you will, is going to be less about the coding and more about both the architecting as well as the editing of that code. And I don't feel like there's as many people out there that have that skill set as we're going to need.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. And I think that it's also about tools, right? Like having tools that can help you do this, right? That can ease sort of scripting out where to look and what to look for, based on, because there's a lot you can learn based on, what libraries is it using, what are the, key vulnerabilities that are happening in this environment or that environment. So I think there's a lot that can be done between tools development and skills accretion that can help fill that. I mean, one of the things that I'm really liking that I'm seeing a lot more out there, and this comes with Figma, and I also recently did a course for LinkedIn on magic patterns. Both of them allow for these new sort of ways where you can design your brand and you can create, like design systems effectively. So that way you could actually be having sort of front end devs and designers collaborating on building these design systems. And then the vibe coding is sort of just pulling it all in so that everything has a consistency, all the apps you ship. I mean, design systems was one of these things that came around. Everyone was talking about it like a decade ago. Everyone wanted to have a design system. And then what happened, even InVision, I remember I worked with this company called Modus Create, and they're a consulting company. And we were partnered with InVision, and they had this like design system tool that they were going to use and deploy. And they totally just put it away. They just shuttered it because there wasn't enough demand. And I think it's like, it's such a moving thing to try and create these design systems and create like, okay, we're going to create all these components and designs so everything looks the same and every app has the same core components. And it's a great vision, but I think in reality, implementing it with all your different dev teams and your designers and keeping it maintained, I think it was just too much of a nightmare But this, I think these kind of tools can actually do that. And then you start adding in the ability to pull in sort of like pre-written, pre-cleaned code. So like all of our auth is going to use this because we've already done this and cleaned it up. And I think as we get to that point more and more, it's just sort of putting together puzzle pieces. And I think that's another sort of piece of the whole thing that's going to make it much more viable technology.
I'm interested. I was going to ask you a couple other questions, but we'll go sideways here for a second. What are your favorite vibe coding tools right now? What are you using the most? Because I'm sure we've got listeners out there. Maybe they're entrepreneurs. Maybe it's somebody that's just got an idea and they've got some exposure to the different AI tools out there. What would you recommend that they use, and what are your favorite tools right now?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think my number one favorite, especially for non-technical users, is Lovable. Um, I just they've had a lot of hype, and so people have heard of them. But that tool, they keep updating it in all the right ways, and so it's every time I'm like, ooh, some new shiny thing comes out, I want to try it, and I always end up going back to it just because I like the way that they're implementing it, and they're doing it and adding things in, and because they have like the agentic thing, they implemented that. Um, they they used to work with Supabase, now they've sort of pulled it in, and they've got their own cloud. That it's basically just an instance of Supabase, but it works better. That was the thing with Supabase is once you plug that in, it was like, okay, now you're going to get errors. And anyone who's ever debugged in vibe coding, that's the worst thing because you get in this like because you're relying on it essentially to fix itself because you don't really know, especially if you're not technical. Like I don't know what happened. Yeah, so you're just clicking the fix it button again and again, and somehow it's not fixing. So you have to. There are smart
Shocking.
ways to do it. Yeah, yeah, exactly. But I like the way that they do it. That magic patterns that I mentioned, um, I like them because what they're doing is it's similar to Lovable. It's like a web-based tool, generates everything, but they just took the back end out of it. They're like, let's just say we don't have a back end, and let's focus on what we'd want to see in like a prototyping tool that prototypes to code. So you end up just writing these front ends. You can build websites. It has like native plugins to send email and to do like some of the key things you'd want if you're just building a website. Um, but you can, it has these tools for, like I said, like these design systems. So you can create these themes that have, all your colors and fonts, and then you can even create components within them. And the components even like it's well thought out. So the components have different states based on, whatever state you're in, like hover and things like that. So it's a really intelligent tool, and then you can reuse that stuff. So I like that for prototyping, and I think that is such a good thing. And when you combine that with tools like Strela, which is it's a user research tool, uh, now you're talking like you can do the work as like a product manager that would require you to have a full UX team. And you can do it so much faster. So you build this prototype that's actually functional. When people enter things, it responds and they can go through and actually get a feel of what the app would feel like. And you're watching them use it and interacting with them through this AI, right? And if you've never used Strela, basically what you do is you put together like a questionnaire, and you can plug in a prototype, and you can give people tasks and say, hey, why don't you try and do this task in this app and talk through it while you're doing it, and then you sort of talk it, and it records all this stuff, and it can ask follow-up questions that are generated dynamically, and all this cool stuff. And then when it's done, it will actually give you insights into all that data. So you don't have to sit in on any of these meetings. It can help automate the recruitment of your users based on all whatever sort of categories you want, like demographics and things like that. And then it'll do all the user research for you, essentially. But you also have the transcript, so you can go through stuff yourself. And it links directly to the clips and the videos when it pulls out insights. I mean, this is crazy. So I can build a prototype in a few days. I can launch a UX research study in another few days. And in 2 weeks, I can essentially have like a full set of research that I've done on this prototype and determine if this is the direction we want to go. And I can present that to the product, the CPO or whatever, and say, should we do it? And they can say yay or nay. I mean, it's crazy. We've never been able to do stuff like that before.
I love how you ended your answer to that question, because I think it goes directly to the heart of two things. It goes to the heart of the changing nature of certain relationships within organizations, and then it also goes to the heart of mindset shifts. And I'm interested in both of those. So I'm interested first in what is the mental shift that a non-technical founder or an exec is going to need to make to embrace this AI type of driven product development? And I guess similarly, what kind of mindsets are going to hold them back? Because what you're describing is a fundamentally different way of thinking about things. And then I want to get into that internal relationship piece too.
I mean, to me, it's really just an extension of like lean and agile. It's because the whole idea with lean startup methodology and agile methodologies is, you know, build fast, ship things, get data, reassess, and then build again, ship it again, reassess, and you're constantly just doing that. And if something works, you double down on it. If something doesn't work, then you pivot. And that's like, and this just speeds that up. So I feel like it's the same basic mindset. Now, that said, having done product consulting for a lot of different organizations, a lot of product teams are not thinking like that. They're not moving like that, right? They're mapping out these big roadmaps that may or may not be based on actual data or the right data. And then so they've got now 6 months of work, and then they just stuff it in, and they're just sort of producing that no matter what the results are. And then 6 months later, they look and they're either in trouble because things didn't work, or they're happy because they were lucky and something worked, or that, maybe they did use some data and they built it right. And look, there are some things that need time to build just by the nature of what they are. But I think there's a lot of companies that get stuck in this cycle of just doing it for whatever reason, either because they're trying to, manage the CEO because he wants to see this, or they're trying to manage the sales lead who is pushing for all these features because they think they could sell more product if it has this feature or that feature, right? There's always some dysfunction within the organization that compels product teams to maybe not move in the right direction.
Wait, you just said there are salespeople out there that are selling things that haven't been developed yet?
Hard to believe, right?
Hard to believe. Oh my gosh. Okay, so before I leave this subject, let me just kind of outline a very generic scenario here. So I'm a CEO. I'm a non-technical CEO. I've always relied on my CTO or my dev team to take the ideas that we've got and turn them into products. So with what we're talking about here, how does this change that relationship? Are you seeing CEOs out there that try and engage in a little bit of vibe coding on their own to better bake their concepts from different departments before they go to their CTO or development team? Or what are you seeing out there with this?
I think maybe in small startups you might see a CEO doing this, like a founder, that kind of person who's really sort of, they're still working through the vision. They have ideas. For whatever reason, they're not able to articulate it to the team. I think it can be valuable for that. I think most CEOs are way too busy to get down in the weeds like this. And frankly, I find the CTOs that end up perseverating on product, there's probably something they're missing, because product is just one part of the whole formula, right? And if they're always trying to fix things with the product, I would say, like, are you sure you've done your research? Are you sure your sales is working? Are you sure your marketing is working? Do you know who your ideal customer profile is? I mean, how many CEOs don't know their ICP is crazy. But I do think certainly, like, people that work close to CTOs and CPOs, or even like, in designs where they have experience, like VPs of experience or VP UX, I think they might not be doing it themselves, but they might have, one of their PMs or designers or someone, doing an initiative. And these things shouldn't take long. That's one thing is I find, even with my courses, they take my course because they want to figure it out. And then they're surprised because in a month and they've not only learned the technology, but they've like built a legit app that has a database and is calling on APIs and has authentication with Google. And like, so you can do this stuff so fast. And that's the mindset that needs to change. It's like, hey, just let's try this and see what happens. And this is not, the end. You're going to get pushback from the engineering team for sure. Every time I post something about vibe coding, there's guaranteed going to be like half a dozen engineers that are calling me a hack and calling my work slop and this and that and the other. And fair enough, they do have a point. But the flip side is you got to experiment with these things. If you don't, your competitor is. That's the thing. If you're not playing around with this, the other guys are. And they're going to get something out there and they're going to learn something before you do. And so is it worth just sort of sitting by and waiting for this to be perfect? I don't think so.
I couldn't agree more, and I'm glad you channeled the specter of engineers and the pushback there, because and we touched on this a little bit, but I want to go a little bit deeper on this. The basic concept here is that non-technical folks can build prototypes, essentially, is what we're talking about. What do you think that means for how technical teams should be deployed? We talked a little bit earlier about kind of the changing nature of code and how we might need more editors. But in terms of the actual technical teams, how they're structured, how they're deployed for a mid-market company, what do you think the implications are here when anybody can build a prototype of something?
Mm-hmm. Well, look, I think there's a couple different angles to that. On the one side of things, I think there are teams that are completely not doing this at all. They're not doing any innovation. I think there's actually a lot of product teams. They're not innovating, they're not testing, they're not doing big ideas. They're stuck in that, what we call in product, the build trap, where they know the next like X features that are needed because they have data, they're doing user research, they're doing those things right, but they're just incremental, death by incremental improvements. They're never launching that new product, they're never pushing the envelope, they're never doing that thing that's going to make them the market leader, right? So I think those kind of companies can get here now with one person. They can allocate one person's time to that job, and now they have experimentalism. On the other side of the spectrum, you have companies that are doing that, and they're currently, they might have an innovation center or an innovation team, and their job is to test new apps, or they might have, there's a myriad of different ways that they go about this. But on those teams, they typically will have like a designer, someone who's sort of running the vision of whatever it is they're testing, and then one or two devs on it. And I think on those kind of teams, you can do that with one person, or you can split that team up and they can do 2 or 3 times as much as they were able to do before by using these kind of tools and just getting more data more quickly, frankly.
Perfect. I love that you raised the issue here of product management. And so I want to give you universal powers here to rewrite the rule book in terms of traditional product management principles. And I say this because you've been a consultant for decades. You've worked with startups. You've worked with large companies. So if you were king of the world here and you could rewrite this rule book, what traditional product management principles would still apply in this AI first world? And what do you get to just throw on the burn pile?
Mm-hmm. So I think the first piece is from tradition is strategy should always come first. Right? And I don't think every PM is doing this, but I think you should always have strategy and a vision, and that should include knowing who your customer is exactly, like where you could spot them, and knowing what exactly your value proposition is as a company and as a product. Like what is that North Star? Like what differentiates you? And I think those things are absolutely like that never changes, right? Beyond that, I think a lot of the time that product managers spend writing specifications, writing PRDs that nobody reads or are just scanned once and then waste binned, writing user stories that are nonsensical and that are sort of built for tracking, but then when they get into Jira, they just get broken up into like a multitude of tasks and no longer make any sense in the concept, so you can't track them anymore. Tracking progress, like these kind of things, PMs are spending so much time doing this stuff, and I just don't think it's valuable use of their time. And I do think that these tools can allow a product manager, like if they've got a vision of how something should be, like how can we work these tools into the process so that devs can understand what that is and they can see it better. And part of the thing that I'm seeing is when a product manager has this idea for a feature or for a product and they vibe code it first, they start seeing also the limitations of the programming environment, right? They might have some vision for some UI that's actually it's not realistic to be able to build that. And so when they start seeing and it also gets them to the point where they're going to be talking about like, how should we implement these components? How should we make this feature look? And now they have to talk to the engineers about that. And so I feel like it forces that, it can, in a good world, force that conversation between product and engineering when it should happen. I think there's a lot of product managers that conceive of things totally outside of what's technically possible. And sometimes the devs end up like working so hard to build out this thing in a certain way. And they realize the product manager doesn't care if they had just done it using a component that they knew about. But they never made that, they never had that conversation. And I feel like this forces that quicker. So I think that kind of thing can really make things go more smoothly.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. All right, let's switch gears here. Let me ask you a provocative question. If everybody can build an MVP in a weekend, what becomes the real competitive edge of a company?
Yeah, and this is, this comes back to really just knowing your users and knowing your value proposition. Like, you have to understand what that inflection point is. I've done a lot of advising of founders, and so many people have, and this happens in enterprise companies too, but so many people have this, like, I have this product idea. I'm going to build this product. It's going to be so awesome. And I'm like, okay, but what problem are you solving with that exactly? And they're like, what do you mean? I mean, look at how it works. It's going to be amazing. I'm like, yeah, but why would I pay for that? What's it going to help me with? And a lot of times when you really get into it, it's like, it's a great technology in search of a problem to solve, and nobody's going to buy it. If there's not a fundamental need for people to pay for it, they're not going to buy it. And look, that need might be just to have fun or connect with other people. I'm not saying that there aren't ways to create innovative apps that they don't have to solve a very specific problem, but it's solving a problem of, human connection or boredom, or, those are still problems that need to be solved in certain specific ways. But ultimately, knowing that, it's going to come back to that, and AI can help with that too, and understanding your data better and getting this feedback from your users and understanding who your ICP is. And that's a huge thing that so many companies just don't do at all.
Mm-hmm. All right. So no more solutions in search of a problem. Solve the problem first, and you'll be in good shape.
Yeah, of course. That's it. That's
Sure.
all it takes.
That's it. Okay. We just cracked the code to business.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
Yeah. I mean, look, those fundamental things are not going to go away. Like understanding your user, understanding what problem you're solving, understanding where you fit in the marketplace and what your value proposition as a company is and your niche. And then understanding how to grow in that and understanding how to, address verticals and find new verticals to go after and what they're going to need that's going to be different from previous verticals. All these things these core business things aren't going to go away. And look, these are things that AI can help us with, but making all the connections and getting all that together, it still requires humans to solve these problems. It's not, you can't automate all this stuff. It's just not going to happen.
I couldn't agree more. And I think the core question that keeps me up at night when I'm thinking about mid-market companies and smaller companies here especially is, let's say that I'm in an organization and I do understand the customer and I do understand that the problem that I'm trying to solve is a real problem and it's commercially viable. And let's say that there's an enterprise level company out there that has a solution, and I can vibe code, and using some of the things that we've talked about in a not too distant future, I can deploy a solution against that company, or vice versa. I'm a larger organization and I can move quickly and deploy it into a niche space. I don't have to go out and spend tens or hundreds of millions of dollars anymore to buy that company. I can simply replicate it. What do you think this means with respect to mid-market companies and well-funded startups competing against larger organizations? Because I lack clarity on this. I really do. I can see it going both ways. And this whole issue of the democratization of building and getting to market, assuming, again, per our last piece of conversation here, the fundamentals are sound. I don't have a really good answer for that. And I'm interested in your take on this.
I mean, I think these are like questions. It's funny because every time a technology comes up that empowers people to do more, these are exactly the questions that come up. I remember this happening. I'm old, so I remember this happening when the internet first came out. I remember with desktop publishing, people are like, "Well, what's going to happen in newspapers?" That didn't end well, by the way.
Oh no, that is maybe not a great example for us to use right now.
Yeah. Yeah. But the internet came. What's going to happen when anyone can post content anywhere on social media? Now, if people are publishing stuff, and look, it changes the environment. No doubt, it changes it. At the end of the day, big companies just they can't move as fast. That bureaucracy just cannot move as fast. There are exceptions. I think Google does a pretty good job of building diverse things and building a lot of things. But I still think, like, as big as these companies are, Apple could have shipped a dozen more products in a dozen different spaces in these years, and they just don't, because they have their way of doing things. And look, they shutter things. They had a car that they were working. I mean, they're working on so many things, and oftentimes they don't become viable. And they have to. There's a certain level that they have to do things at, and bureaucracies just create more work. And young companies can always get up and be more innovative. That said, it does produce opportunities if you work for an enterprise where you could create your own product now. You could create a whole new division of that company. And for people that are hungry and want to do that, I think there's a lot of opportunity for them to advance and to do something that can have impact on the company more quickly than ever before. But I still think there's going to be, the smaller, more nimble companies are willing to take more risks, and they're willing to do things faster. And it's okay. There's less at stake for them. If something breaks, it's no big deal, and they haven't invested that much in. I think Google, I don't think they would ship a vibe coded product. They just wouldn't. They might build it that way and validate it, but by the time it goes live, they're going to have 1,000 engineers on that, and it's going to be super architected.
Yeah. It does beg the question, though, something that you just said, and this hadn't occurred to me before. I wonder if we might see a return with some of the larger enterprise scale organizations to the internal research departments and kind of mad scientist laboratories that we used to see. I think about Xerox PARC, and I think about IBM, and a lot of those really big sunk costs you could probably do now for a fraction of that spend internally. Like when you were saying just now about an internal employee at a large enterprise spinning up a different division, I wonder what this means for the risk tolerance for larger organizations and the ability to innovate within their confines, but with their backing. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. I know, having worked with the HP Labs, I did some work for them. And what's interesting about a lot of those organizations, the sort of skunk work organizations, is especially in these big companies, they know their advantage. right? Their advantage, like HP's advantage, is they can create. You know, they never got into building software as a service, right? So in HP Labs, the stuff they focused on were like new devices, new hardware. You know, one of the products that I worked on there was it was pretty cool. It was a little overlay that you would put over your plugs, and based on the signature of each of the different devices as they pulled power from the plug, because it went through and it would analyze their electrical signature, it could tell what they were. It'd be like, well, this is a television, this is stereo, this is a computer, you know, and it could kind of tell what it was, and you could tweak it and stuff, and then it would track your power usage, and you know, and all the stuff. It was really cool, and that was what they were working on. So I helped them build sort of the interface for how that would look, and you could see your power. But you know, in the end, they couldn't get the cost down enough, because you're not going to save that much money as a person at home on, you know, because you turn off your TV at night, or whatever, you know, and don't have it in like silent mode, or there just wasn't enough. The margin was there, but they're playing around with ideas like that are like building new hardware, doing things that would be a higher barrier of entry for other people, and they can get these devices and build them pretty quickly because they have the infrastructure for that. And so I think some of these companies, they focus on these bigger things, but for software companies, you know, I don't know why they wouldn't start playing around more with these things. It seems to me, but I always thought they should have been doing this before. I was surprised at how many companies, there were still companies that had these sort of innovation teams and whatnot, but I was surprised how many really didn't do anything or didn't do much. Like even Google dropped their, like, you know, they had that one day a week you could work on whatever you wanted back in the day, and they dropped that. So, you know, but maybe it'll come back. I mean, I think it should. There's a lot of opportunity now to do that.
We've channeled the question of people a number of times here in our conversation today, and I'm interested in one particular role, specifically the CTO. And I'm wondering what the CTO role might look like in 5 years. And I'm also wondering, for mid-market companies that are hiring right now for technical leadership, somebody's going to be in that seat for 3-5 years, hopefully, right? What capabilities should they be prioritizing? So you've got an inside view of some of this. What's your take on the CTO role and its evolution over the next 3 to 5 years, and what kind of hiring criteria companies should be looking at or prioritizing for that role?
Yeah, yeah. Actually, I have a CTO career guide and LinkedIn course that I've done. Like a couple 100,000 people have gone through it. It's been great. So I've thought, and I just did an update. So I've actually thought a lot about that question.
Perfect. Follow Drew on Twitter for more advice, right? Yeah. No, this is great. Perfect. The floor is yours, sir.
So I think, look, it's tough now. We're at one of those inflection points, and there's a lot of uncertainty on a lot of different levels. Like with between the tariffs and like the current political climate, plus all this like burgeoning AI technology, and we don't know where it's going to lead, and like robots and drones, and like there's a lot of uncertainty. And so I think, you know, the CTO nowadays really has to have a handle on, first and foremost, they have to have good people skills, you know, and I think because at the end of the day, technology is going to move fast and it's going to change. And so someone who is able to get a good team together, you know, who is able to build a team of people and create a culture of exploration, create a culture of dynamism, right? And that's going to be a absolutely critical quality moving forward. But then also the ability to understand technologies and to be able to experiment, specifically with this AI, like people who understand the core of how AI works and things like, you know, what are the limitations of LLMs and what are the options of what's coming next. And people who are really forward thinking in that way are going to be key. And with hardware stuff too, because, you know, there's going to be new hardware that's going to come along. I mean, robots is is a bad example, but it's one we see a lot in the press. So, if we have robots that are all of a sudden doing these things, like how is that going to affect our product? And, I think the other piece to it is like, what is like a software as a service, like what's going to happen to that whole thing when vibe coding becomes a reality? And one of the key things that we haven't actually discussed here that I think is a really valid use of this is internal tools. Like if you have software tools internally that support processes, or have processes that currently aren't supported by software tools, why not vibe code these things? Because now you're not pushing them out into production. They obviously have to have a base level of security and non-bugginess. But beyond that, if you're just talking about like munging data and sharing data and things like that across different things, or pulling in data from different applications and reporting them a certain way, like why would you bother buying these tools to do that when you can build it in the same amount of time as it would take to implement and do this? I mean, the fundamental problem with SaaS that I've always thought is I only need 20% of this tool that's being offered because I'm this customer. And there's this customer that uses 20% that I'm not even using, right? And then there's customers that use 10% of that and then another 10% over here. So you've got like 80% of the customers are only using 20% of the software. And even no one is using all the software. And in order to get a large enough user base, and the larger your user base gets, the more spread out you become. And so it becomes like a challenge, right? And you always have all this extra stuff in there that not everyone needs and they don't want to pay for it. And eventually you're going to lose customers on one side or the other because it's not going to meet enough of their needs. So these things you can build internally. So, to come back to your question, I think it's going to require someone with vision, someone with people skills, someone who has their eye on technology. I think the old days of like hiring someone who really understands like a certain programming environment and can implement and sort of make sure that everything's in order in that way. I think those days are over. I think it's going to become a much more higher level sort of role and a much more, someone who's able to hire and manage people and allocate time best. That's the person that's going to be, instead of overseeing and being sort of the guy who controls the software development cycle.
So for our listeners over the age of 45, the future CTO role is Soylent Green.
Yeah, exactly.
It's people, damn it. It's people.
It's people, yeah.
No,
yeah.
I, in all seriousness, that's a very well thought out answer, and you clearly have been thinking about this a while. So I appreciate you walking us through that. One of the things that you mentioned as you were unpacking all that for us was this question, and basically you were talking about software trying to serve too many different industries, too many different constituencies, and I really appreciate it when someone has the ability to work with companies across many industries and then apply that focus to specific industries or specific companies within an industry. And I know that you occupy that. You've worked with companies and industries all the way from Atlassian and banking and shipping and logistics. And so here's my question. Based on all of this, again, focusing on middle market companies, there, in my opinion, is a wide gap between actually adopting AI versus people saying that they're adopting AI. And I'm very curious in what you are seeing out there right now, specific to the middle market, between what people say they're doing and what they're actually doing.
I mean, I have a bit of a selection bias because most of the people I work with are either just starting to adopt, so they're taking a course of mine, or I'm consulting with it because they're struggling with it. So my selection bias is, I'm not seeing the people that are killing it. The people that are, all the companies that are killing it, I'm not seeing. But I'm seeing what I'm seeing with AI, what I saw with mobile, what I saw with, as technology evolved from like PHP to more sort of TypeScript, JavaScript, you have these, it is human nature to get stuck in a groove, right? And implementing new things is hard. And finding a way to sort of fit that in the mix it's not easy. Like I have so much sympathy for product managers, the work that they do, and that's who I mostly work with is product people. But like the what they're trying to do in terms of like having to understand technology, having to weigh all the data that they have, having to think about where the future of this product is going to be, trying to solve everyone's problem that's currently a customer, as well as growing into new customers. I mean, it's a lot of work, and then to have to like now go to this new technology and figure out how to use that, and that technology could totally disrupt not just your own job but your company. I mean, it's a lot. It's a lot to take on. So it's, you know, change always happens way slower than we think it would. There are people that are ahead. I would say probably 10 to 15% of companies are really using AI to its full capacity. And that might even be a generous amount. And I would say 50% of them are experimenting with it in some degree actually. I would say the rest of them are in varying degrees of from like, they know that one or two people are sort of doing something, or they're putting them in courses, or they're going to conferences. So they have like an eye on it, but they don't have any cohesive plan or any sort of way to actually address it. All the way down to like total ostriching, head in the sand, hoping that like something bad's going to happen and it's just going to go away.
I see a lot of that for sure. That's funny. So I think you're very self-aware to call out your selection bias there. Drilling into the companies and understanding that there is a piece of that there. The companies that you have worked with, and our time is getting short here, so I want to ask you one or two other questions after this. But drilling into the companies you've worked with, what's separating the winners that are getting real results from everybody else that's just checking a box, in your opinion?
um, I mean, it's funny because this, I get asked these questions, and I know we're talking about vibe coding, and I know I've said it always comes back to the fundamental stuff. It really does. Like the companies that are doing well and that are making this work, whether they're quickly adopting AI or not, are the ones that really know their customers. It's as simple as that. Like they've identified who they are, they know what their niche is, they know what their problems are. They do user research on the reg, both quantitative and qualitative. They have ability for the sales team and the marketing team to communicate with the product team so that and the support team so that anyone who's talking to the users is sharing that information out. Like those companies, they're going to be okay. They're going to weather this because they know their customer and they know what they want. And some of them are like, you know what? What our customers don't want is like some new AI thing that's just going to get in the way of using our product, right? Or is going to force them to use the product a different way that they don't know and they don't understand because they're already these other companies, their customers are also trying to figure out how to do AI and how to integrate ChatGPT or whatever into their workflows. So, and just throwing on another like chatbot in your product like that, is that solving any problems? So it comes back to the fundamentals on those. And virtually every company we come in, whether we're helping them to figure out how to optimize AI search engines, or we're helping them to figure out what AI thinks to implement in their product, or helping them to figure out how to streamline their product management, like all of them, we still end up seeing like, hey, you're missing some stuff about your customers. You still don't know. You're making all kinds of assumptions here. And if you're making assumptions, then you're going to fail at something. You're going to miss something if you're making assumptions. You have to know that data.
I think that's a solid place to end that particular question. So, last question here, returning to the whole subject of vibe coding and our whole conversation today. Let's just say, because I know that we've got listeners that fall into this category, I've got an exec. They're listening to this episode. They're intrigued by what you're saying. They're not really sure where to start. what is going to be the lowest risk, highest reward experiment that they could run in the next 30 days in the vibe coding world, or just, AI development tools if you want to be fancy?
I mean, I would say if you have any backlog of anything or any like ideas that have been floated around that you've never touched, and they should be fairly simple, right? Like building a huge new like whole other thing is something pretty simple, or at least that you can conceive of a simple version of it. I would say spend the time and have someone do it, right? Just see what comes out of it and just, take the time to put it together. One of the things that I did for one of my courses, I created what I call the Vibe PRD. And it's basically, I have a prompt and you fill in some things about what you want to build, and then you put it into whatever LLM you like, and it'll give you a very specific thing that tells you what to do. And then I end up plugging this into the background in Lovable so that everything that goes out, every prompt that I write, all that stuff is included. So it's always keeping its eye on the core vision. But do something like that. Like build a simple PRD for it, for an MVP, for some idea that you have, and just build it. Just see what happens, see what comes out of it, and then poke at it however you want to. Validate it with users, have your engineers poke away at it. Give a QA guy a day to just like see if he can break it. Like, just see what happens and see what it is. And from that experience, everyone who touches it will get an understanding of what this is and whether it's going to be value and how it might be valuable in the organization.
I think that's real solid advice. So if I'd like to take a next step, you've mentioned some of your courses. Where can I find you? Where does one go to learn about all this at the altar of Drew Falkman?
Well, thanks for asking. Look, the main place that I am is on LinkedIn. So, I would say follow me there. And I share information about this kind of stuff. I also have a website, drewfalkman.com, that links to my courses and things. And, I encourage people to reach out. I have an open profile on LinkedIn, so anyone's welcome to message me. If you had ideas or thoughts about it, please do. And I'll provide you with a coupon code chat. I've got a couple different courses coming up. I'll provide some so you guys, so anyone who watches can get a discount on the courses. I have a couple coming up. One's on using magic patterns and Strela to validate prototypes, and another one's like a vibe coding course that sort of 4 weeks, you build an app, and I'll help you do it.
Excellent. Love it. Any other top secret courses in development right now that you want to tease for 2026 and beyond?
I've shipped most of my courses. I really want to do a course on the new Figma AI stuff, because I think that's really cool. So I'm in talks about that. And then I want to go next level on vibe coding, and I want to get to people who have vibe coded with those tools and like where do you go from there? Now, okay, so I vibe coded, I get Lovable, but now I want to do like more cursor and sort of more advanced for slightly more technical users that aren't afraid to download an IDE or run something at the command prompt now and again, and actually build something that is maybe a little more robust and a little more powerful.
Great. All right. So basically a CISO's worst nightmare.
Exactly.
And on that note, no, I definitely encourage folks to continue playing with this and definitely look Drew up for more practical tips and check out his courses. This is a really hot topic, and I don't think it's going to be burning any less bright anytime soon. So I really appreciate your time today and you sharing your expertise with our audience. This was absolutely fantastic.
Yeah, it was great. I had a good conversation. It was good questions. I think we went down some interesting places.
I couldn't agree more. And hopefully our listeners think that as well. And speaking of our listeners, thank you for once again tuning in to AI for the C-Suite, where we're committed to helping middle market leaders thrive during the exponential age. If you found value in today's discussion, please be sure to subscribe to our podcast, follow us on all the socials, and visit our site, aiforthecsuite.com. Join us next time as we continue to unlock the potential of AI for your organization. And until then, keep your algorithms running, your leadership evolving, and your AI in check. Take care, everybody.